It's at this time I'd like to tell my little anecdote because David, I can say I have seen Ben-Hur on the big screen, and I have watched Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston.
You
Uh,
ought to be in the
yes, that is my
pictures.
claim to fame.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is James, joined as ever by my good friend Steve, and this is Every Best Picture, where we are going through every winner of the Best Picture Academy Award from Wings right up to the present day. This episode, we are talking 1959's Ben-Hur.
And James, I'm always trying to get you to watch faith-based films, and now you have no excuse. If this was an Academy Award-winning Best Picture, you cannot deny me this. You're going to have to face watching a Jesus movie.
This is true. I've painted myself into a corner here, but I have brought support. I am delighted to welcome my very good friend, longtime colleague, and he's just an absolute great force of nature, huge personality, David Canfield. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Hey, David, very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Steve. Let's gang up on James.
I was going to say, he said he brought you on for support, but really you're going to be supporting me. I think you're on team Jesus here.
We're going to have a marsh sandwich.
That's it.
Well, that's not to say that I'm like on the side of the Romans here. It's just that I do like a little balance with my with my faith-based cinema. So, David, for those at home, those watching, who might be unfamiliar with your place in the world, why don't you just introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and why are you here?
James and I met through Screen Anarchy, which at one time was called Twitch Film. And I'm, just like Disney had their 9 old men of animation, I'm one of the 9 old men of Twitch Film. And I was brought on mostly because of my expertise in horror, and I was sort of the U.S.-based correspondent for a little while. But that grew and changed over the years. I've been a contributor to McGill's Cinema Annual, which is a pretty respected film encyclopedia, sadly no longer with us. And I've also contributed to spectacular optical books like Satanic Panic, Pop Culture Paranoia in the 1980s, and Yuletide Terror, Christmas-themed horror on TV and film. And I also go out to Fantastic Fest every year and see absolutely everything I can. I think I'm up on 110 films for the year at this point.
Not bad.
Wow.
Easy to do when you're unemployed.
And I think Fantastic Fest is where we first met, if not 2010, 2011, I think.
Yeah.
They used to rent a house for the team, and so we were under the same roof from the get-go, I think, weren't we?
Oh, those days. And you and Pierce would bring those bottles of Japanese hooch. Oh my gosh, we were living large.
Good old days. But you're still going, right? You've been. Were you not there last year?
Last year, as you know, I had a heart attack in August. They call it the Widowmaker. I probably wasn't supposed to be sitting here right now because of it, but I'm fine. And I had to miss Fantastic Fest for the first time in 13 years, and it just destroyed me. I mean, the people that I could have interviewed at that event last year.
Are you planning to go back this year, hopefully? So.
Oh my gosh, I'm hook or crook.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm still consulting for their programming team, and that is always a joy and a pleasure. In the meantime, though, we need to talk sword and sandals, or at least sandals. When Steve and I hatched upon the idea of expanding this series and bringing on guests, as I said, you were definitely someone that I wanted to bring on. I figured you and Steve would have a lot of shared ideas, history, whatever you want to call it, experiences.
So far. We've only known each other about 30 minutes now, and there's already an uncanny amount of shared experience.
Fantastic. So we asked you, what would you be interested in talking about? You seemed very keen to talk about Ben-Hur. So why Ben-Hur? What does that mean to you? And do you remember sort of your initial relationship with the film?
Well, I couldn't find a hentai movie that had won an Oscar. I hadn't really been one yet. No, I'm kidding.
Didn't you
Ben
know?
Hur's an amazing
Didn't you
film.
know, James, that David and I have known each other for years, and this is actually an intervention, and
Yeah,
we want to introduce you to Jesus Christ.
that's
That's
it.
it.
We're here to finally get you on the straight and narrow.
That's it.
Okay, well, good luck. Good luck. Your
Keep it
time
the
starts
closer to
now.
left.
Yeah, have at it.
Ben-Hur is really, there's no other word for it but astonishing. There are movies that come out and they win Oscars and nobody remembers them much or talks about them much. And then there are movies like Ben-Hur. And Ben-Hur is a movie that people are going to talk about as long as there's movies. It earned every single one of its 11 Academy Awards. And in the history of biblical epics, it's actually um, probably one of the more historically interesting films in terms of how it deals with that the early church and with the occupation of the Romans. I like it a lot. I love like the Ten Commandments and a lot of the smaller quote biblical epics, but Ben-Hur is just one of those amazing movies that when you see it, especially if you see it on the big screen, you never forget it.
Yeah, I must confess I've never had the opportunity to sit on the big screen, but I think it's one of those films that was like always on TV. I certainly couldn't point to when I first saw it. I think I probably slowly absorbed it in dribs and drabs over a number of Sunday afternoons just from being in its presence when it was just always on, I think. But it's, for me, it definitely stands as, arguably the archetypal Hollywood epic. Particularly when you look at you talk about sort of an Oscar movie. I think something like Ben-Hur, something like Gone with the Wind, something like Lawrence of Arabia are the ones everybody is thinking of when they think of, that kind of old-timey Hollywood kind of epic, that kind of best picture winner. That's the kind of movie.
It's at this time I'd like to tell my little anecdote because David, I can say I have seen Ben-Hur on the big screen, and I have watched Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston. Uh, yes, that is my claim to fame. And that at around, I want to say about 1988, Charlton Heston went around America and he screened Ben-Hur on theaters that he chose that he felt could convey the grandeur of Ben-Hur. Before the screening, he got up and talked a bit about it. And what the catalyst for this project was somebody had come to him and said they had just watched Ben-Hur. And he said, "Oh, where did you see it?" And he said, "Oh, I got it on VHS on TV." And he was like, "You cannot watch Ben-Hur on a VHS tape on TV. That's not watching Ben-Hur." So he
Right.
felt it was his duty to introduce people to the big screen version. Now I'm there with my some neighbors, my mom and a couple other moms, and I was probably about 14 years old. 13, 14 years old. And when Charlton Heston leaves the stage, it turns out that the row in front of us was VIP, and it was like in the middle. And he comes with his mother, his 91-year-old mother at the time, and comes and sits down right in front of me. And so he introduced himself and shakes our hand. And so the whole time I'm watching Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston's head right here. And during the intermission, he gets up and he's shaking our hands and thanking us for coming and asking us what we think of the film. And on the way home, my mom and all the other mothers are going, "He's such a man." He's just,
Did he have his
but
rifle?
yeah, yeah. I said, "I actually liked you better in Planet of the Apes." No.
Yeah, I kept waiting
No,
for you to say, "Get your hands off
of me,
me."
you damn dirty Roman. So yes, that's my little anecdote. A lot of times when I play two truths and a lie with people, I'll say I watched Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston.
That's a great one.
That's pretty
That's a great
fantastic.
one.
What I love about the film is that you watch it and as you're watching it, you're thinking a number of different things. On the plus side, you're thinking, okay, this is what they mean. I think when they used to say, and it was probably around this time people started saying it. They were like, "Oh, if Shakespeare was alive today, he'd be making movies and he'd be making big movies." There's something very Shakespearean. And I don't just mean stagey and theatrical, although in some sequences it certainly is like that. But in just that, in terms of its characterization and its structure and just the sort of the epic scope of it and the idea, the character arcs of sort of nobility and heroism and tragedy and all of that, you're watching it and you're kind of thinking, okay, I think this is the kind of sort of Shakespearean style. I think that they are the writers here are sort of drawing from Shakespearean theatre in order to create this great sort of pompous, ostentatious kind of spectacle. And at the same time, people are seeing Shakespeare in the film and reflecting upon that and going, oh, okay, well, this is what Shakespeare should be doing. If he was around today, he'd be doing this. On the other hand, you're watching this and you're going, oh, this is what Monty Python were watching when they wrote Life of Brian. This is totally what they're ripping off, and the
This is
movie
where the fish slapping dance came from. Okay.
I mean, right from the start, when it starts with the nativity, and it's just, well, yeah, but not here. We want to go. We want to look at like next door, and like the entire movie is like in the shadow of Jesus, 50 feet behind him, and just in his dust, and you're like, that's what the whole point of Life of Brian is. It's
what
all
have the
about
Romans
that.
ever done for us?
Exactly, the aqueduct. So
Yeah,
so
we can
not to
talk about
derail this completely, but but
it's funny because, well, it's just funny because if you think about a movie like this getting made, there's a great story of when Cecil B. DeMille was making the Ten Commandments. He was up on a bullhorn, up on a tower, and everybody was hot and everybody was tired. And he saw these two women extras talking, and you would think, okay, imperious director with a bullhorn, oh my God, what's going to happen? And he leans down and he goes, "Do you have something you want to share with the rest of the cast?" And the woman said, "Yeah, I was just telling I was just asking my friend, when do you think the old bald guy is going to let us go have lunch?" And he looked at the crowd and he looked at her and he said, "Lunch." And that's the background of these things, is this incredibly just mundane business of the movies resulting in something like this is just always, who calls movies a happy accident.
Wasn't this film, I mean, lest we forget, this is a remake as well of like a silent epic from the 1920s. Obviously, it's adapted from a novel that was written in the 1880s, but it was written to kind of cash in on the success of the Ten Commandments. And also, wasn't the studio, was it MGM? Didn't they had a lot of money, sort of, or credit at Cinecittà, the big studios in Rome, and I think wasn't one of the reasons why they had to get this production off the ground was to cash in on all that credit that they had. I think I read that. So
Wow.
yeah. So it always is for these really practical, market-driven, economic reasons. We always think, oh, the purity of the old system, or nothing like that. It's no. It's always been about sort of the bottom dollar and just making money and making a big sort of crowd pleaser like this. But I think it says everything when here we are, 65 years later, and we're still talking about it. And we're not just talking about it because it's the next movie on a list that we're going through. It's because it really is still one of those great sort of milestones, one of those sort of great tentpoles where you're like, how have we progressed since then? How have we regressed since then? And, just literally, how does it compare to this kind of yardstick of a movie?
And
There's
why
still,
aren't
though, there's a plumb line going through this film, though, that I picked up just rewatching it today, where that Christian message, like, yeah, it might be still all dollars and cents, but there is an intentionality in this film. They are trying to highlight a particular message because they could go creatively in a certain direction. They could downplay certain Christian elements. They intentionally, of course, obviously, it's based on the book, as you mentioned, which is a tale of the Christ, but the remake in 2016 didn't highlight these elements to the same degree. That, in fact, I don't even think I made it all the way through that film. There is a whole idea of there's a different way of living life, and are we willing to go the way of Rome and violence and revenge and hatred, and there's always going to be this cycle of violence that never ends. So, yeah, it's Rome today, but it's going to be Britain tomorrow, and then America. It's going to be there's always another beast coming up out of the sea to enslave. Or are we going to break the cycle? And I just love that this film leans into that with a real intentionality.
It's a very much a film for today. And, the first thing I want to ask is why we can't make tentpole movies like this now. We make tentpole movies that are all done on green screens. And sometimes those movies are great. More often than not, they're formulaic and they're not that great. And they're kind of like a lot of biblical epics. They just sort of come out and they're flashy and then they go away. And people, if they screen them again, they screen them to make fun of them as camp and whatnot. But I think, when you look at, like, for instance, if you look at Christopher Nolan, if you look at Kenneth Branagh is an interesting guy because, of course, he's worked with Shakespeare a lot. You get that approach to film. Steven Spielberg still has sort of that approach to wanting to make a big, meaningful movie. But when you talk about the faith aspect of this film, it's surprisingly intimate and not overbearing and isn't reductive. I think one of the more interesting choices in this film when it comes to that is we never hear Jesus speak. And when you think of Jesus, you think of somebody who's orating. You think of somebody who's speaking. Here, they rely on the raw power of the idea that even just gazing lovingly at somebody, letting somebody know they're accepted, is a powerful, powerful, powerful expression of what this faith is all about. And I have to say, they don't even make the Romans out to be uniformly villainous, horrible people. There are a number of moments in the movie where you watch Romans wrestling with what it is to be Roman and yet be inclusive, and it's just beautifully done. I think there's. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's that wonderful scene with Pontius Pilate talking to Charlton Heston when Charlton Heston basically gives up his opportunity for Roman citizenship. And it's exactly what you said. Pontius Pilate is very retrospective. He says, yeah, for now, Rome's on top. So, you kind of got to get with the program. Inferring Rome is not going to be always on top. And there is this cycle that's going on. And like you said, what's one of the powers of the religious message here is it's not like, wow, Jesus is giving this great message and we should listen to it. It instead relies on the impact it's having on the people in the region. These people are being impacted. So it's not the message and we better get with the program. We are experiencing changed people that thought one way before, and now they're thinking a different way. There's a different way of living life. And I think that's one of the powers of this film is, like you said, it's not heavy-handed. It relies on people's hearts being changed, being the real marker of the message.
I think that's one of the reasons why you don't even see his face, let alone hear him talk. And I know that was kind of traditional of the period, and they tended in all of these biblical epics, whenever he showed up, they're like, oh, okay, well, let's keep him off screen. But I think it plays into that as well. It's like his face and him as a man, him as a person is not what's important. It's the message that's important, and that's personified, most strongly by Ben-Hur himself, who just spends the whole movie going, oh, that guy, yeah, I remember that guy. And then at the end, when he witnesses the crucifixion, he's like, I get it, and it's all about sort of the passing on of the idea and the message and how that, like you say, how that impacts other people, most notably, Ben-Hur, rather than a movie about, Jesus preaching to, giving the Sermon on the Mount or whatever it is. I like the way actually how the film cuts away from that scene just as it's starting. The people gather and he's just, the Beatitudes are just kind of kicking in and it's just like cut. And then later on, Ben-Hur's kind of going, oh, what did that guy say? And it's one of the women.
Esther. Yeah, the woman, his love interest is the one who then repeats the Beatitudes back to him.
Exactly. So they're already already spreading the word of God rather than actually sort of providing a
I think
soapbox
it
for it.
cuts right after they say, you hear "Blessed are the cheesemakers," and then
Yes.
That's the
it
one.
says
Yes.
the
And Elon Musk
the
runs in with his Wisconsin hat on. Yeah, it's
and I'm glad you brought up Elon Musk, because there you guys were in Hong Kong, and here we are looking for Teslas to torch. And I think that there's something that this movie does that is fundamentally amazing, and that's that lifts the early church and Christ Himself out of a transactional frame. This is not about, if you do this, then you get this, which is
Right.
kind of unfortunately how Donald Trump and people like that see the world, very transactionally. Here, instead, it costs you something to be the person who doesn't strike back, to be the person who forgives, to be the person who's being asked to trust in the middle of what looks like absolute disaster. And that the answer to that is to look for someone to help, not just, walk around shaking your fist. A lot of fist shaking, these days, and I get it. I shake my fist a fair bit too, and write a little bit on politics. But I think that ultimately people can see. One of the things you hear a lot about, and this is as close as I want to get to preaching or whatever, but the thing that you hear a lot about these days is people want to be identified specifically with the aspects of Jesus that defined his character, rather than the accoutrement of religion or institutional approach to government or whatever. That we have to start from the bottom up. We can't be a top down society anymore, because it hasn't served us well enough. We have to find a middle ground. And so there's a marvelous sense of balance that I think is here, but it embraces a core.
Mhm.
And that's just, in this day and age, you don't get that in Lethal Weapon 4. Lethal
Yeah.
Weapon 1, a little bit. Lethal Weapon 4, not so much.
Well, I think jumping on that, I know William Wyler didn't like a lot of Carl Thunberg's screenplay for this. He took
Mm.
a lot of the structure, but he had other screenwriters come in, including, I think, Gore Vidal, to rewrite some of the dialogue, because he felt, among other things, that it echoed too much of politics of the current day in the film, and he wanted to get rid of that. And I'm thinking, if it had really anchored itself into 1950s politics, would it have had the same impact it has today? Or with what David is saying, because it almost is timeless in the message that it really emphasizes in this film is as relevant in any time period, 1950s, 2025, any time, because it's a timeless message.
I mean, it's difficult to know, obviously, how overtly and how specifically that original draft would have been, and whether it would have soured the experience, like for an audience of today, whether an audience of today would even be watching the movie anymore or not. I know that the writing of the film was certainly one area where it did fall under some controversy. I think they were constantly just sort of battling with the script and rewriting it, bringing in more people, to the point that I think that ultimately sabotaged its Oscar chances. That's the one Oscar it was nominated for that it didn't win, was
Yeah.
adapted screenplay. And I think it is perceived to be after the fact that it was because there was a great sort of furore over exactly who deserved writing credit and why, and what they had brought to it and what had been left out.
Yeah, Weiler
Certainly,
was furious about that.
right, for sure, for sure. I mean, and so I mean, who's to say? I mean, I'm not going to go wade through and find a dozen different drafts of the script to see which was quote unquote better, but I certainly concur that the way it is today, there is this kind of timelessness to it. There is a universality and an accessibility to it that you can ultimately sort of project onto it, which kind of goes back to what we were saying about the way that they deal with Jesus and his teachings in it, by only focusing on the receipt of that and the reception of that information, rather than how it is put out there into the world, but rather how it is processed and received, I think only adds to the accessibility of the message.
I have an anecdote. I was in the Lake Street screening room here in Chicago. This is before Passion of the Christ came out, Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. And Roger Ebert was up in his usual little chair, and this is quite a small room. And I had just been sort of accepted into the critical community. And so I was, not even, I think, a member of the Chicago Film Critics Society at that point, or association at that point. And I just wanted to be a fly on the wall. I was convinced I was going to get thrown out of this tiny room as all these people that I admired so much were filing in. And Roger was always there first. He was always sitting in his seat. And this particular day, I filed in, and I was one of the first people there. So it was me and Roger. And then there was a critic from the Tribune. And this critic was pacing up and down in front of the screen. Again, this is a very small room. And he said, and Roger said, Bill, what's up? And he said, I was just thinking, I hope lightning strikes Mel Gibson. And Roger goes, why? He goes, because Mel Gibson promised he was not going to subtitle the ancient dialogue in this film. And now God told him that. And now that he's changed his mind. And by this time, John Iltis had come in, and John Iltis ran really the biggest movie PR firm in Chicago at that time, John Iltis and Associates. And Roger looks at John, who is Jewish, and he goes, well, you know who to blame that on? You blame that on the Jews. And and I'm sitting next to John Iltis, who for some godforsaken reason has chosen to sit next to me, drawing attention to me, which is the last thing on earth I want. I'm trying to sink in my chair. And John Iltis goes, what are you talking about? And Roger Ebert goes, well, it's their fault for making all those huge Christian movies in the all those huge Christian epics. And everybody bursts out laughing and whatnot. But the point was made that it took, and I think Wilder said this later, it took a Jew to make a great movie about Jesus. Which I thought, yeah, there's some sort of observation there, because ultimately, there's only one shot of the Sanhedrin in this movie, and they're all at the cross, and they're all going, just like looking like with this kind of look. And it's almost an acknowledgement that there was a political apparatus behind the execution of Jesus that had far more to do with politics than some imagined Jewish conspiracy. This was about people who were having to choose to be either of one kingdom or another. And we see this today in Christian nationalism. We see this bent towards politics and away from the things that really matter. And I think that's, learn your lessons however you can, man. Whoever's got the best take it.
It's believe me, I think it's I've said, and it's a little off track, but I got to say, David, is that from the crowd that we come out of that have embraced Trump, to me, they are the Pharisees of those days. If you'd gone to the Pharisees in Jesus' time and you said, do you guys love Messiah? Or do you long for Messiah? Oh, yes, we long for Messiah. We love Messiah. And the Messiah shows up, and if you believe, if the Christian faith, he is God incarnate. Like, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And essentially, they don't like him. He's not what they expected. And he's not trying to make Israel great again. He's trying to reconcile everyone. And you're realizing that this the crowd we're dealing with today. If Jesus came back, and showed up in these guys' churches, in 3 months, they'd want him gone because he's not interested in making America great again. He's interested in reconciling humanity. And that is at fundamental odds with making America great again. And so when I
Hashtag
see
not my Messiah, wouldn't it?
not
It'd be
my
something.
Messiah, he's not the Messiah. He's a naughty little boy. Yeah.
We're just going to keep quoting that movie, I think.
It's
It's great.
Well, look, we got to try and keep this on
on
some kind of
tangents. Yeah.
even keel and down to a manageable length. So
Movie.
I wanna raise a question, with obviously all of us, but with Dave you in particular. When we talk about these films, these every Best Pictures winners, we ask two questions. We say, has it stood the test of time, and does it deserve its place in Oscar history? And so, with regard to Ben-Hur, to what degree do you think the movie itself has stood the test of time?
I think that, the first thing you look to with any epic is you look at the spectacle. And spectacle tends to get downgraded by virtue of the special effects getting, becoming very dated. And when you watch Ben-Hur, there's a noticeable absence of special effects. Now, there are special effects all through the movie, but they're mostly used like when you see the boats out on the horizon,
Yeah.
and things like that. They are there to establish a mood, not to be the focus. And this is a movie that is absolutely wants its special effects to be invisible. They don't even show the lepers being healed, except to reveal their clean faces. They hide their faces, and it's the only miracle in the film, unless you count the earthquake that happens after Christ dies. So I think that there's an incredible bit of decision making there when you're making a movie for, I think it was $15 million, and a quarter of it got spent on the Chariot Race. And they go, okay, we're gonna blow our wad on this scene. And to this day, of course, people say, oh, was this guy killed or not? And
the 200 horses apparently died during the making of it, and I think there are elements like that where people Stephen, yeah, but I mean, Steve and I were talking earlier that people are looking for ways to be offended these days, and not that the death of 200 horses is not something to get offended by, and I think it's probably the kind of thing that sort of instigated protections, for animals and even people, extras and what have you. I think there are elements like that which some people are going to hold against the film today. These kind of practical elements where they're like, oh yeah, but it didn't do this right. It didn't do this the way that it would be acceptable today, and things like that. But in terms of the actual film itself and the craftsmanship on display, I was just going to say, I think we've managed to begin to nurture a sort of a newfound respect for the old ways, if you like. I think sort of 10, 20 years ago, people would have been like, it's so dated, it's so fake, it looks so wooden, it looks the naval battle is clearly miniatures, and you're like, yes, but, and I think in recent years there's been a pushback against that and be like, yes, but celebrate the craft. And
because when you're watching Ben-Hur, particularly on a big screen, you're not thinking hardly ever about the fact that it's film craft. There's a big thing when you talk about this mythologizing, and people do this with all sorts of films. The Amityville Horror and The Exorcist have their legends, and in this movie, the legend is that somebody died in the Chariot Race and they left it in, and that 200 horses supposedly died. Well, neither one of those things is true. They're just categorically not true. And it's interesting because I see your Casablanca poster, Steve,
Hmm.
Michael Curtiz and Errol Flynn, I believe it was Michael Curtiz, got into a huge argument because Michael Curtiz would just shoot horses right and left and use them in ways that were abusive to the
Hmm.
animal. And Errol Flynn, basically had to threaten him to get him to stop. That was not the case here. Wyler wasn't the greatest guy on set, but he knew that he was making a movie. I think he said to Charlton Heston at a bar one night, Chuck, I'd love to be a nice guy on set, but that isn't how you get a great movie made. And be that as it may, I think that's more the lore of Hollywood is this blue collar, like toughing through and doing the best job that you can. Really, Ben-Hur is the almost the ultimate version of what you can do
Hmm.
to make a movie look great and look believable and have impact.
But it's also, I think, that one of the best examples of that statement, it takes a village to make a movie. This isn't, the singular vision of some sort of stuffy, pretentious auteur. This is thousands of craftsmen and technicians and artists and performers and, horses and wranglers and what have you, all coming together to build something. And it's something beautiful. This is almost like a sort of a Sistine Chapel, if you like. It serves a purpose and it transcends that purpose, and it's incredibly beautiful and stood the test of time. But it took a lot of hard graft from a lot of people to put it together for it to
You know,
emerge and endure as such.
one of the
Well,
big criticisms of Wyler was that he never developed his own style because he did move between genres. I think it's interesting. He never did a horror movie. He never did a science fiction movie, but he did all these other kinds of films. He won the Oscar 3 times,
Mm.
which is absolutely astounding. And I think 13 of his movies were nominated for Best Picture.
I think I read
That's
he's the only person to have won the best director Oscar 3 times, for films that also won Best Picture. I think
yes,
like
that is
other
true.
people have won, like John Ford has won 4 Best Director Oscars, but I think only one or two, if any of those, won Best Picture. Maybe none of
Yeah.
them actually, but
I was going
Steve,
to
what
say,
were you going to say?
I was just going to say, having rewatched the chariot scene again, not for a moment do I think, oh, I've got to see this through a 1958, 59 lens, and because the effects is not up to speed. It's like watching this is nail biting. It is still nail biting today. And when you see
Mhm.
some of those guys go under the chariots, you're thinking, God, you
yeah.
jump for a second, like you do one of these because it looks so real, and you're thinking, wow, did they use a dummy? How did they do that? That's pretty. It looked incredibly real. So obviously, a lot of thought was gone into this. I do know that when they hired Stephen Boyd, and we hadn't mentioned Stephen Boyd yet, and I hate to do a whole talk on Ben-Hur and not mention Stephen Boyd and his fabulous performance. But apparently, when he got the job, Charlton Heston had already been doing chariot training for weeks. And so he found himself in a massive catch up. He's going to have to learn this really, really fast. And so I can only imagine what it would have been like to have to train to be a charioteer. I mean, and who teaches that these days? It's just it's a fabulous scene, and obviously the whole film rests on that central scene of the chariot race, and it still holds up, 70 years later.
For sure. I mean, as for decades, well, I'm not sure exactly when I first watched it, but for years, Ben-Hur was just like, this great old time classic. And all anybody ever talked about was, oh, it's the Chariot Race from Ben-Hur. The Chariot Race from Ben-Hur, over and over and over again. The Chariot Race from Ben-Hur is like one of the great action sequences all time. It's like the car chase in Bullet, or the car chase in The French Connection, or the
Yeah.
shootout in Heat, or whatever there are these sort of there are these landmark action set pieces, and the Chariot Race in Ben-Hur was always one of those. And I think, having just rewatched it again like yesterday or whatever, I think it absolutely deserves still to maintain that kind of prestige recognition. It's an absolutely thrilling piece of cinema within
I,
a
yeah.
monumental film.
I think that if I think the thing we all have to remember is that if we didn't have the Chariot Race in Ben-Hur, we wouldn't have the pod race in Star Wars One. No,
Yeah.
I'm kidding, because
Yeah, I was going to say I'd be
okay,
fine with that. Yeah.
that's I'd be fine with that. I think that that's the thing is they're
That's what Ben-Hur
capturing.
was missing, was a Jar Jar Binks character, David. You've
I
nailed
really
it.
needed that. What's
That's
a
I knew
movie?
there was something missing in this film today when I was rewatching it, and darn, now I know what it was. There was that missing Jar Jar Binks character.
Jar Jar should have been there in there with a whip. No weapon for you, sir. You know. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think that's an example of how not to do spectacle. It's sad because on the one hand, yeah, they were fine. They were creating a technical apparatus that hadn't existed before in Star Wars. But in Ben-Hur, they were having to really bring every single element of film craft together in those moments. And you talk about an actor, you know, people don't think about actors. You have to be able to sing and dance and do acrobatics and play the guitar and, you know, look hunky, and, you know, it's actors' lives are not what people think they are.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a wonder that no one was killed in that film. Yeah, you can't talk about Ben-Hur without talking about the Chariot Race, but the thing that makes the Chariot Race really work at its core is the thing that makes Ben-Hur work at its core.
Well, yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about Charlton Heston and his performance. I mean, because, you know, it is one of those performances that the entire film really hangs on. It's like if that doesn't work, then the movie doesn't work. If you have, you know, an incredibly bland sort of blank canvas of a protagonist, then no, you have to invest in this guy and follow him all the way. I mean, the great sort of unsung remake of Ben-Hur is obviously Gladiator. We drew so many elements from Ben-Hur, and similarly, because Steve and I already did our Every Best Picture episode on Gladiator because we thought we'd do it just ahead of Gladiator 2, which just came out. And that's another of those movies where it all hangs on a single performance. You could say the same about Mikey Madison in Anora, from this past
Yeah.
awards. That without that performance, it doesn't work, and it's one of those years where the Oscars kind of get it right. And you know, say what you like about Charlton Heston, he's become an incredibly problematic figure, particularly in later life. But Ben-Hur would not have worked without that performance. It's that blend of sort of vulnerability, heroism, stoicism, you know, belief, and all of those things coming together, and you're just like, yeah, it's one of those kind of all-time great, but similarly old-fashioned kind of performances. I mean, he won.
Yeah.
This is after Brando winning for On the Waterfront, and it's after Borgnine winning for Marty. Just you look at a couple of years, you know, previously, and
Yeah.
yet it endures, and it works. You could put this performance alongside sort of Olivier's Hamlet. It's that kind of. It is a very theatrical, kind of larger than life performance, but it's what a film of this size needs, I think, if you're gonna be able to stick with it.
Well, and the interesting thing is, you know, it's an epic, right? So it's huge. It involves a lot of people, like you were saying, and everything. But I think, like, look at a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Mm.
Name a part of that movie that doesn't work. So you can make movies like this on a smaller scale that are every bit as good as something like Ben-Hur. They're just different.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is, for instance, what makes that pair of directors absolutely, I'm dying to see what they're going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And William Wyler, you know, again, criticized for not having his own style, but his style was this uncanny ability to bring all the right elements together.
Yeah, he knew he was an epic storyteller. I mean, his others were what Best Years of Our Lives was one of the other movies I think he won Best Director
right.
for,
Yeah.
which was phenomenal. I mean, I can't remember if Steve, if you had seen it before, but we were both bowled over by it, weren't we, when we watched it a little while ago? I had never seen it before. And it's absolutely fantastic. Very good. Very good. Yeah, it gets its hooks into you for sure. But I mean, that's an epic but just an entirely different kind of epic. I mean, yes, you could call Weiler a journeyman filmmaker in that regard. He was a technician rather than an artist or whatever, but he was a damn good one, and he knew how to deliver the goods and bring the crowds in, because both of those two were absolute sub blockbusters that won critical acclaim as well. So, Okay, so I think this is probably one of the easiest questions that we've ever had to ask. Does Ben-Hur deserve its place in Oscar history? And I think without a shadow of a doubt, absolutely yes, it does. I mean, it came into the night, obviously, favorite to the point that other studios like Paramount, who were, it was commonplace for them to sort of buy into the show, ad space or put it on their TV channel or whatever, and they essentially sort of rejected it and said, why do we want to sponsor sort of the Ben-Hur Awards kind of thing on the night? And so apparently a lot of the stars didn't show up because there had been a big fail at the ceremony the year before, where it had been they were so panicked about the show going over that in real time they were hacking lumps out of the show until they ended up hacking out too much, and so with about 20 minutes to go they'd run out of show, and I think Jerry Lewis was hosting, and so they were like, just make something up. And so apparently he was on stage kind of ad-libbing "There's no business like show business," getting out, pulling people out of the.
Ben-Hur is missing. Is Jerry Lewis.
A big musical number at the end, yeah. He was pulling people out of the audience, like celebrities out of the audience, to participate, and it was all just a complete shit show. So the following year, which was the Ben-Hur year, basically no one went, because they were just like, well, I'm not getting involved in anything like that again. It was just one of those years where I think everybody knew, just going in, it was like, well, Ben-Hur's just going to win everything, and it almost did. It still holds the record. The record has been tied. It won 11. Titanic has since also won 11, and Return of the King has also won 11. But yeah, it was Ben-Hur's record, and it has not been beaten since.
Well, and if you look at the other movies that it was nominated with, and I don't have the list right in front of me, none of them are anywhere near.
No, I mean, what you've got Room at the Top, The Nun's Story, The Diary of Anne Frank, and probably the best other one, Anatomy of a Murder, the Otto Preminger film.
Yeah.
Curiously, there is another great movie in the mix that year, but it didn't get a Best Picture nomination, and that's Some Like It Hot, which obviously is a great movie for very different reasons. That was nominated for Best Director, and Jack Lemmon was nominated for Best Actor, and it got some other nominations as well. But that was shut out. And as great as that movie is, that doesn't strike me as an Oscar Best Picture kind of movie. That maybe a performance here and there, maybe a screenplay for Wilde or something like that. But the fact that missed out, I'm okay with that. But yeah, there isn't really anything. Anatomy of a Murder is a great movie. But Ben-Hur is.
I'm really stuck on this idea of Jerry Lewis in Ben-Hur. I lie with the leprous to still, but hey, I don't know if I like it now. I think I really could have.
There's still time. On that note, David. So I think, yeah, we're all in agreement that the Ben-Hur is rather good, and is still rather good.
Absolutely.
Considering that when I first heard the title, I thought they were making movies about trans people in
no.
Ben-Hur. But then I realized, you really screwed that up. I'm old. I'm old.
Stuck in your ways.
Oh gosh. All right. Are we wrapping it up there, James?
Let's nail this one down. Yeah. Okay. David, absolute pleasure. It has been too long, and we must do it again sometime soon. For anybody out there who wants to find your stuff or follow you on social media, where should they do that?
It's interesting, but Facebook is a great place to find a lot of writing that I do. But I am opening up my own Substack. It's going to be called Confessions of a Creature Feature Preacher, and it's going to kind of be a catch-all for all my writing. So lots of film reviews, lots of interviews, lots of some music, and a lot of video blogs. So I'm hoping if you keep your eye out for that, and then of course always on Screen Anarchy.
Fantastic.
Excellent, David. I was going to say I'll subscribe to your Substack. You can subscribe to mine, David.
Yeah,
I don't
like
have a
it.
Substack, but I will subscribe to yours, so I'll do that.
Yeah, if you could just stay out of there so I don't get imposter syndrome, that would be great.
I don't think there's much creature feature preacher content that I feel equipped to dip my toe in. So I think we're good. I think we're good.
I love the name,
Yep.
Creature Feature Preacher. Yeah, I love it. It's great.
I love it because it was given to me by somebody who is not a Christian, is not a person of faith, and that I love dearly. Good friend, and Aaron Christensen, actor here in the Chicago area, and was given to me with great affection. And I thought, wow, that was kind of the beginning of realizing that I don't have to have something to prove in this world. Something I think all writers really struggle with.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
Well, one day at a time. It's good to see you looking so well, and we should catch up again soon.
Yeah. David,
Yeah,
it's
I'll
been a
bug you
pleasure
out.
meeting you.
And Steve, are you on Facebook?
I am. We'll connect there.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
All right.
I'm off to bed, guys.
All right. Until next episode. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.